The Hello Kitty murder case took place in Hong Kong, in the spring of 1999. Nightclub hostess Fan Man-yi was abducted and tortured after being accused of stealing a client's wallet, owned by one of her frequent customers and a notorious gang member. Fan was held captive by 3 men and 1 girl before dying on April 1999. Her body was decapitated and her skull placed inside of a Hello Kitty plush, which gave the name for the murder case. Though the torture of Fan Man-yi was horrifying enough, perhaps equally horrifying is how authorities discovered the crime, through a 14-year-old girl who reported her murder to the police. Not only was she responsible for turning the torturers in, but she was also part of the kidnapping plot. It all began in May of 1999, when Ah Fong, a traumatized 14-year-old girl, made her way to a Hong Kong police station to confess a crime. She told officers that for the past several weeks, she'd been constantly plagued by visions of a dead woman, who had been bound by electrical wire and covered in scars and bruises. But the police brushed her hysterics off, dismissing her claims as nothing but fever dreams or teenage nonsense. Their interest was piqued, however, when she offered a suspicious amount of detail of how the supposed ghost of the woman was brutally murdered. The police eventually followed Ah Fong back to an apartment in the city's rundown Kowloon district, and discovered that Ah Fong's nightmares were in fact quite real. Inside the apartment, they found an oversized Hello Kitty doll with the decapitated skull of a woman inside it, Fan Man-yi. Born in 1975, Fan was abandoned by her family as a child, resulting in her being raised in an all-girls orphanage. When she turned 15, she was told to leave the orphanage because they had an age restriction. Becoming homeless and addicted to drugs, Fan was forced into street prostitution until the age of 21, when she began working at a brothel. Fan eventually married one of her clients, a fellow drug addict, in 1996. She gave birth to their son 2 years later, not long before her murder. Fan's husband was described as abusive, and neighbors would report being woken up by sounds of the couple's fights, and the child screaming and crying from their apartment. Upon the pregnancy and then birth of her son, Fan decided to turn her life around in order to protect her son and provide him a safer life. She quit drugs and prostitution, got a job as a hostess at a nightclub, and eventually left her violent husband shortly before her murder. Due to these sacrifices, she had a much lower income and struggled to support herself and her family. Chon Man-lok, a 34-year-old gang member, was one of Fan's regular clients at the brothel. In early 1999, Fan was accused of stealing Chon Man-lok's wallet, which contained about roughly $500. When Chon Man-lok was told who stole his wallet, he demanded Fan to return the money in addition to a fee of $1,000. Not wanting any trouble despite her innocence, Fan immediately returned the stolen money. However, she needed additional time to secure the additional fee. On March 17, 1999, Fan was abducted by Chon Man-lok, 3 men, and 1 teenage girl, in Block 90 Citrus Road. The teenage girl accomplice was Ah Fong, likely a pseudonym given to her by the Hong Kong courts, after she helped incriminate the perpetrators. The group took Fan to an apartment at number 31 Granville Road, Tsim Sha Tsui, where they imprisoned her for a month. Ah Fong was the 14-year-old girlfriend of Chon Man-lok's, though he was known to have multiple girlfriends under his employ. In all likelihood, Ah Fong was another one of his prostitutes. Initially, Chon had intended to make money off of Fan by pimping her out to other men. During Fan's imprisonment, she was tortured and raped. According to one source, she was beaten with metal bars, sometimes while being strung up and used as a punching bag. On one occasion, Fan was kicked in the head around 50 times. Spices were rubbed into Fan's wounds, her legs and feet were burned with candle wax and hot plastic, specifically so she couldn't walk, and was forced to consume human feces and urine. All the while, she was forced to smile and say she enjoyed the beatings. If she refused, they subjected her to even harsher torture. This treatment eventually led to septic shock and various traumas. After a month of torture, Fan succumbed to her wounds on April 15, 1999. Some sources claim that she died while her captors were out, while others say she died overnight. Ah Fong was the one who discovered Fan's corpse. After confirming she was dead, the henchmen moved Fan's body to the apartment's bathtub and dismembered her with a saw. Then, they cooked the individual pieces of her body to stop her from decomposing and emitting the smell of rotting flesh. Her skull, which was the most difficult body part to dispose of, was sewed inside of a Hello Kitty doll while the rest of the body was discarded. The casual disposal expedited the arrest of the perpetrators after Ah Fong's confession. Only her skull, one tooth, and some internal organs were recovered in a plastic bag, after Lau confessed police to the scene on May 24. Chon Man-lok and his henchmen argued that she had died from an overdose of methamphetamine that she had administered herself, though most experts speculate it was her injuries that eventually killed her. They only speculate because there's no way to know for sure. Ah Fong testified against Chon Man-lok and his henchmen in exchange for protection, though she also likely received in part due to the fact that she was so young. In an attempt to rid herself of the haunting she claimed to be experiencing, she detailed the torture that the three men put Fan through. Though the story was so disturbing many felt it could not possibly be true, the evidence uncovered by police was damning and concrete. The apartment in which Fan had been tortured was full of Hello Kitty memorabilia, from sheets and curtains to towels and silverware. Furthermore, the body part trophies taken from Fan were found inside, with evidence that all three men had interacted with them. Using boiling water on the same stove on which they were cooking dinner, the killers boiled the pieces of her body and disposed of them with the household's garbage. Her head, however, they saved. After boiling it on the stove, and allegedly using the same kitchen utensils to stir their meals that they did to move her head around, they sewed her boiled skull into an oversized Hello Kitty mermaid doll. Additionally, they kept one of Fan's teeth and several internal organs which they stored in a plastic bag. At one point during confession, when Ah Fong was visiting the torturous trio in Chon Man-lok's apartment, she witnessed Chon Man-lok kick Fan 50 times in the head. Ah Fong then joined in, hitting Fan in the head. Though the details of the extent of the torture inflicted by Ah Fong were not released, as part of her plea deal, they were no doubt extensive. When asked about why she joined in on the torture, the teenager replied, "I had a feeling it was for fun." After a trial which lasted over 6 weeks, the three men were convicted of manslaughter, as the jury ruled the remains were not sufficient to show whether Fan was murdered or died from a drug overdose. While the jury could not rule that the men intended to kill Fan, they did determine that she had died as a result of their abuse. Lau, one of Chon Man-lok's assistants, testified at the trial in exchange for immunity. Justice Peter Nguyen, who sentenced the trio to life in prison with the possibility of parole, stated that, "Never in Hong Kong in recent years has a court heard of such cruelty, depravity, callousness, brutality, violence, and viciousness." Psychiatric reports described the three as remorseless. There would be no review for parole for 20 years, or until 2020. In August 2022, one of the accomplices released on parole, Leung Shing-cho, was arrested and sentenced to jail once again for 12 months for sexually assaulting a 10-year-old girl. The publicity around the case resulted in the production and release of films that told the story. The apartment building in which the crime took place was demolished in September 2012 and has been rebuilt in 2016 as a hotel, with the new tenants downplaying its sad and sordid history.